Hi, it's Michael and Anthony here presenting Small Business Banter. A healthy micro and small business sector means a successful economy and a more vibrant society. Small Business Banter is about helping regional business owners better prepare for the current challenges, but also for the next stage of business success. I'm Michael Kerr, founder of Kerr Capital, advisors to business owners. Each week, with Anthony Turner from the Small Business Mentoring Service, we'll interview a different small business expert or a fellow business owner and get them to share their best tips and insights for you, the listeners. Small Business Banter is brought to you from the studios of 104.7 Gippsland FM and is heard across Australia on the Community Radio Network. Thanks also to our supporters, Kerr Capital and the Small Business Mentoring Service. Welcome into another edition of Small Business Banter Radio. Ben Lazzaro from he's the CEO of Australian Made Campaign is in talking with us today. Welcome in, Ben.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks for having me.
Look, as always, it's a pleasure to have people doing interesting things coming to talk to us. So, also with us, Anthony Turner, my co-host from the Small Business Mentoring Service. Welcome, Anthony.
Thanks, Michael, and hello to all of our listeners.
All right. So Ben is, as I said, the CEO of Australian Made. I think the formal company name is Australian Made Campaign Limited, but that's neither here nor there. So it's a very famous logo, and it's held as a mark of a true mark of Aussie authenticity. So it's a very trusted, recognised, and widely used country of origin symbol. It's been around for 30 years, but Ben, you've been CEO not for that period. Do you want to give us a little bit about you personally and your role as CEO of Australian Made?
Sure. My background is in engineering way back when, so I spent a lot of time, the early part of my career as an engineer in the oil and gas sector, and then into manufacturing as well within that sector. Then I moved into doing marketing and communications for engineering and technical based firms. So there was a requirement to understand the technology as well as be able to market and promote it. So I did quite a stint in that area for some time as well. And then I evolved and moved into a couple of, PR agencies in that sector, and then found myself at Australian Made Campaign. With the background in manufacturing and marketing, I became their marketing and communications manager. I did that for some years and then moved into a deputy chief executive role, and now find myself lucky enough to be the chief executive since 2017. Of this wonderful brand that you touched on earlier about all those wonderful attributes, which I'm looking forward to discuss with you.
Yeah, nice. Look, I'm pretty sure that the familiarity and the awareness of Australian Made is quite high. But right now, can you tell us about what Australian Made, with all that heritage of 30 plus years, what it looks like today, and who's it really targeting to help?
So the Australian Made logo is administered by, as you put it before, the Australian Made Campaign Limited. So we're a not-for-profit organisation, and our job is to essentially administer and promote the Australian Made logo. The logo's origins are with government, but that's not the case today. It rests with this not-for-profit organisation, and it has done so since 1999. And so essentially what we're here to do is to ensure that the brand is administered in a way in accordance with the rules that govern it. And so to put it hopefully simply, it's what's called the country of origin product certification trademark. So that's a big mouthful, but essentially that means that products that are licensed to carry this brand have met a set of criteria. That criteria is based on Australian consumer law, And we're the organisation that essentially assesses products as to whether they comply to the rules and the law that govern making a Made in Australia claim. Once our compliance team is satisfied that the product does indeed meet what's called the substantial transformation test, then we grant a licence to use this brand for a 12-month period. There is a small fee to use the logo on the product. That is essentially 0.1% of your turnover of those products. So to put it simply, if you're selling $300,000 worth a year of Australian-made product, your annual fee will be $300. That money gets pumped back into the campaign on compliance, auditing, things like that to protect the integrity of the brand. We got to chase down misuse and things like that. And also to a collective marketing campaign. So hopefully you and your listeners have seen, any number of promotions and advertising to promote the brand and the products that carry it.
Ben, from my understanding, there's a number of different sort of categorizations within what you offer. So, there's strongly a difference between Australian made and made in Australia, as an example. Do you cater for variations of the theme of Australian made within the logo?
Sure. So ultimately, it comes down to, do you meet this what's called the substantial transformation test in Australian consumer law? And that allows you to, if you forget about our logo for a second, that allows you to make or confidently make a made in Australia claim or an Australian made claim. There's no differentiation between those two claims. You're making a country of origin statement. If you are comfortable that you're meeting that criteria, that substantial transformation test, and I'll digress for a minute and explain that. So essentially that means, are you turning the ingredients or components into something that's new in identity and essential character? And the best way to give an example of that is, technically or theoretically, you can import every ingredient into Australia and make a cake from those ingredients in Australia, and you can confidently describe that cake as an Australian-made cake. And if you extend that through to a non-food product, that comes down to components that are brought into the country. Are they part of a bigger and new and different product at the end of the day? And that's where the compliance team makes those determinations. To your question about differentiation within the country of origin claims sector, you might look at claims like made in Australia, slightly different to the grown in Australia claim. There is product of Australia. And when we look at the Australian-made logo, the green and gold kangaroo, that can also be used with an Australian seafood claim and a claim of just purely the word Australian for export markets as well. But ultimately, regardless of the claim being made underneath the brand, that the green and gold kangaroo logo means it's Australian and has been third-party certified.
How do you think consumers are at the moment seeing the Australian-made logo? It's a tough question or broad question, but I'm interested in particularly having come through going through what we're going through. Whether there's a real shift back to understanding and appreciating Australian-made in a broader sense.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an extremely pro-Australian sentiment in the marketplace at the moment that started way back. It seems like a long time ago now, but back in probably March, April, we saw that as the COVID pandemic started to take hold, extremely pro-Australian sentiment. And we measure that through commentary through our own digital channels. So visitation to our website where we house all licensed products, have a listing. Engagement through our social media audiences was sky high. Applications to use the Australian-made logo, we're up around 400% at their highest level around June and July. So that not only do consumers have a overwhelming interest in finding Aussie products, but business as well wanted to start telling people in greater numbers that their products were Australian. And we also saw that, we all know someone that's lost a job or had reduced hours or has been impacted by COVID. So there's a far greater understanding around the knock-on effects of buying Australian and the fact that you keep people employed here, not only the manufacturer benefits, but all the businesses that manufacturer uses. I think there's a greater awareness around what we now acknowledge more collectively as our over-reliance on imported products.
Taking up on your point about the higher levels of applications and everything else, if I'm a small business owner, in a regional community or something like that, oftentimes we don't think about going to getting Australian-made certification or something like that, possibly because of a perception that it might be costly, which you've explained earlier is not the case. But the difficulty and challenges and of everything of getting through. How easy is it to actually, or hard, maybe, is it for a small business, say in a regional community, to be able to get Australian-made certification?
Well, approximately 70 to 80% of licensees are small businesses. So this logo is extremely helpful for the small business community. As far as difficulty in getting it, it's a balance that we have to strike because we understand small businesses, you're wearing multiple hats, you're taking care of business, and then these sorts of things tend to happen after hours where we apply for things and branding and marketing and things like that. So it is a simple online application is the short answer to the question. And the only part where there's a requirement from the business is our compliance team will require information or some documentation or evidence of your manufacturing processes. So that might be that perhaps you're making a complementary medicine or a health product. Then the compliance team is going to require evidence of you doing that. And that might be referring us to your contract manufacturer. It might be showing us videos of your manufacturing facility. Pre-COVID times, it might require a site visit, depending on the complexity. But for the most part, it can all be done online and over the phone. And then we issue you with a license. So if it's a straightforward case, you can be up and running in a couple of days. It's only when we start to look at more complicated processes or complicated substantial transformation examples, then it might take a couple of weeks or something like that. But ultimately, we try and make it really quick and easy to get businesses using this logo to their benefit as soon as possible.
Thanks, Ben. And by the way, we are chatting with Ben Lazzaro, who's CEO of Australian Made. Ben, the show is all about supporting regional small business. So when you talk about the application process, and that's well understood, we'd encourage everyone to take a look at that. What types of businesses do you work with? Is it across the spectrum of food? Can you just talk a little bit about the types of businesses and some of the ways they're using the Australian Made logo and endorsement to help them with their business?
Absolutely. So the logo is actually a registered certification trademark across all 34 classes of goods in Australia. So that's all of them. So we have licensees and businesses from each of those classes. So we can be dealing with companies that make a baby product or a health product, through to an industrial manufacturer, through to one that's just making product for export markets. So not only does that keep things very interesting for the group at Australian Made, but also shows how this brand is universal in conveying Australianness across all sectors. And some of the ways those licensees will do that, we encourage all our licensees to use the brand aggressively in their marketing and promotions. And you'll see that more and more in digital channels, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all the way through to your more traditional forms of advertising, whether it be outdoor, TV, integrating it into their radio advertising as well, literally telling people that we're licensed to carry this, so you can have confidence that it's the genuine Australian product. So, a full wide range of different companies from different sectors.
But it's very interesting. We're talking a lot about business because, obviously it has a strong focus for business, Australian Made, and the credibility of their products. But as an aside from that, I noticed that you've got a thing called Kids Club. Maybe you'd like to give the listeners a bit of an understanding about what Kids Club's all about.
Well, we're very conscious that there's sectors of or demographics that are perhaps got a greater level of understanding of the positive attributes associated with buying Australian, and they might be some of those in age groups that have lived through certain periods of history that grew up maybe with more Australian manufacturing or more obvious Australian manufacturing, and I put myself in that category too. Whereas there's an argument that I guess some of the younger demographic perhaps don't have that same experience. So we've got a bunch of teaching resources on our website that are particularly targeted at the primary school age group to help educate them around not only what Australian made means, but also what are the benefits of making things here. And of course, it's all done, everything should be done in balance. I make it pretty clear that we're not any kind of protectionist organisation or anything like that. Balance is best. There is clearly an imbalance between local and imported products, and we're, I think, taking the opportunity to shift the needle back in the right direction. But those teaching resources are there to help our teachers, and they're also, I should say, distributed through to all the educational resource websites where teachers go to find resources for their teaching as well. So, yeah, it's a good initiative that we struck up a few years ago to try and maybe influence some of the younger generation that are coming through with a completely different experience, particularly in the retail environment.
Yeah, I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's good to educate, particularly the younger generation, on the benefits of Australian made and how it impacts on the economy for all of us, etc. Maybe for some of our listeners who are of the older generation who've forgotten what some of those benefits are, you might be able to give us a few of what you see as the direct benefits of being Australian made and an Australian made economy. Yeah,
absolutely. So, essentially, I mean, we're pretty lucky. We find ourselves, in the most part, as being Australian and making Australian products is generally a positive in most markets, including domestically. So when you're buying Australian-made products, you're getting products made to some of the highest standards in the world, and that's from a quality and a safety perspective, and they've never been more important than right now, particularly in certain sectors. So that argument around standards is enormous in Australia. Not only that, you get products that are often sourced from our clean green environment. We all often take it for granted about what we have at our doorstep, particularly when we travel. We're more, more cognizant of the fact that we are very lucky about the fact that we've got a clean green environment to draw those ingredients and components from. And then we can look at aspects around ethical labour and sustainability, and the obvious one, perhaps jobs. And as we said before, it's never been more important than buying Australian right now because of those knock-on effects. You buy something here, it's been made by someone, there's a job for that person, and hopefully a job for future generations too, if we can have those companies remain here manufacturing. So it really is hard to see a particularly negative aspect of making things in Australia. We are a high-cost country, but it does then come down to value. Generally speaking, when you buy Aussie, you get something that's made to those standards. It's going to last. It's going to represent good value.
Ben, do you see that carrying through to more global consumers? I know we've got some challenges right now with key trading partners, and to playing. There's some big industries impacted, but from a consumer level, across the globe, do you see the Australian-made logo, adding a sense of clean green or whatever it might be, and associating it with high-quality product or high-quality produce?
Absolutely. The logo really does make that Australian connection here and overseas, and that's its job. There's so many other things that consumers will assess when they're making their purchasing decision. But if you're in an overseas market, being Australian is generally an advantage or a positive. And we actually carried out some research earlier this year in a number of overseas markets, so both coasts of the US, France, UK, UAE, China. I think that was it. anyway, overwhelmingly, the research was really positive in the fact that when they saw our brand, they knew the product was Australian. So box ticked, it's done its job, but then they also thought it was interesting and intriguing, and it made them made them want to find out more as well. So not only did it was around 87% globally knew that this thing meant it was an Australian product. They also were then intrigued to discover more about the product. And depending on the product category, in some cases, food and bev, they're willing to pay more versus other imported products into that market.
It's pretty powerful. It's odd percent.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of that is not only due to the longevity of the brand and the fact that it finds its ways into those markets on products, so there's some association with it, but the Kangaroo does the heavy lifting because, it is unique to Australia. So even if they don't know our brand specifically, they know it's Australian, they know it's green and gold. And again, I think it was around 80-something% also preferred it in the green and gold colours. So it really does do that heavy lifting at the start. Then you have to convince them about all sorts of other things. Is it the right colour, shape, size, taste? And that's down to the brand. But you've made the Aussie connection there instantly.
Yeah, so you see some business opportunities there for, even at a small scale level for people, manufacturers or, putting together Australian product. You talked about the way you use the Australian-made logo on social media. We've talked to a couple of experts on the show about, the pros and cons of social media, but it seems clearly that, if you get that the Kangaroo in your social media with a global audience, it's probably going to get some pretty good traction for you.
That's right, and everything is so visual these days, particularly in the digital area. We see people, it'll continue to change, but Instagram now has in my view, taken over Facebook. God knows what's next, but it's going very visual. This thing is a visual asset that does a lot of the heavy hitting from that visual point of view. So it can only help when you're marketing your product both here and overseas. And it'd be remiss of me if I didn't mention domestically as well. Roy Morgan Research do research for us every 12 months. We try and get it done. And really positive at the moment. 99% of Australians recognise the Australian-made logo. They're aware of it. But possibly more importantly, 92% trust it. And trust that the products carried are genuinely Australian. And, that's the easiest thing to sell. Any brand would kill for those two attributes.
Absolutely. Look, one of the things that's cropped up quite a bit during the last 6 months has been this idea of manufacturing sovereignty and being caught short, with critical supplies. It's not necessarily directly about Australian made, but it does go to that, what you're talking about, investing in our local manufacturing capability, because we have some fine examples of that and creating jobs. And so you see opportunities ahead for across the spectrum of manufacturing as well as producing.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a very, this is one of those bizarre situations where something that's terrible that has happened to the entire globe essentially has generated perhaps some positive outcomes for Australian manufacturing, and that focus on sovereignty and self-sufficiency may well see Australian manufacturing be given a bit of a jab in the arm. We know, because we're involved in the industry, that there has always been some positive and really innovative companies doing really interesting things here. But of course, if you then have renewed focus from government and a lot of funding to generate manufacturing and manufacturing 4.0, and God knows what it's referred to now, it can only be a positive for not only helping those businesses making the PPE and all those sorts of items, but also the smaller manufacturers that will benefit from the fact that we're going to invest in skills here, because that's a big part of this as well, that we have the workforce that can actually make the stuff we need to make. And we will, of course, evolve the types of things we're going to make. Even though we don't make cars here anymore, there's electric cars, there's electric buses, there's heavy industry still here. Volvo trucks still make products up there in Queensland. Who knew that they'd be churning out 60,000 trucks carrying the Australian-made logo with, I think, half a dozen sites up there in Wacol, Brisbane. So absolutely, there's a positive outlook at a time where there's lots to be concerned about.
Yeah, look, and it's it's about creating jobs, getting people into small business, but there's a strong and long heritage of fine manufacturing and fine produce, and we really endorse the work you're doing. And unfortunately, at the end of our time today, Ben, but we have been talking with Ben Lazzaro, who's CEO of Australian Made. Ben, thanks so much for your time today, and we wish you well with the great work that you're doing.
Appreciate that, and thank you to all the listeners that have tuned in. And if anyone's interested, by all means, go to australianmade.com.au, and you can either apply or you can ring to find out more about it. The phone number's on the website. Or simply join the Aussie Made Club if you're a consumer. You'll see that on the website, and you get up-to-date news and updates about all things Aussie Made.
Excellent, Ben. We'll also put that up on our show notes. So great resource. Thank you for your time, and keep the great work up, Ben.
Thanks, guys.
So that's all for today's episode of Small Business Banter. Anthony and I continue to be inspired by bringing you small business experts and other small business owners and hearing their stories. For any of the links, resources or information we've talked about on the show today, or to contact Anthony or myself, please head over to smallbusinessbanter.com, or you can find us on both Facebook and Instagram. Anthony and I would love you to tune in at the same time next week for another episode of Small Business Banter.